and welcome to the Ninja Cast review of The Last of Us Part 2. I am Rikoku Ninja, bringing this review, and I just want to get something out of the way real quick because this is going to make or break whether or not you even want to listen to this review or not. I have not played the game. Now, before you run off, let me explain why I'm even reviewing this game, despite the fact that I haven't actually physically played it or purchased. This kind of goes back to at the beginning of this year when the first leak started with The Last of Us. Prior to that, I had only ever seen the E3 trailer that showed the dance with Ellie and Dina and their romantic kiss and everything like that. And since I was not a fan of the first game, as a matter of fact, I believe the first game was highly overrated. It had just mediocre and average gameplay. And the story really was just, father-daughter bonding in a post-apocalyptic. It was alright. Like, the main reason I didn't like The Last of Us, the first game, is just because it just wasn't my thing. I wasn't into it. And I felt that the gameplay was mediocre and the story was just okay for a video game. I mean, it was better than a lot of games, but it wasn't what I would call a master. So whenever they showed off The Last of Us Part 2 and confirmed that it was happening, I was just like, well, there's a sequel. And I was kind of left scratching my head like a lot of different fans who weren't just overhyped for it in thinking that the first game kind of tied itself up. I mean, it had an ambiguous ending for sure, but it didn't really leave a lot of room for the need of a sequel, I would say. Now, back when that E3 conference happened and they showed the trailer and everything like that, one of the big things that people were bringing up was that it looked like it was getting woke and going broke because, oh my god, they had a lesbian kiss scene in it. Obviously, they're pandering to the SJWs. This on top of Neil Druckmann being a big fan of Anita Sarkeesian, and immediately the rumor started that The Last of Us 2 was just going to be woke garbage. And while I don't necessarily have a problem with didn't at the time have a problem with the lesbian kiss scene, I didn't like the first game. I wasn't very attached to it. I wasn't very hyped for it. So I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that, or to the game in general. Now fast forward to the beginning of 2020 when the leaks happened, and it took the internet by storm. I looked at the leaks because, again, I had no interest in the game, but fuck it, there's leaks. There's a lot of people getting salty, and the defense brigade for the game was going out and just downvoting everything across the internet, like, oh no, people were freaking out, don't spoil it, stuff like that, and because it's the internet, people totally didn't listen to that. But I watched it, and if you didn't see, first off, spoilers for this entire review, because there's literally no way I can review this game or talk about it without spoiling. But for anybody that didn't look at the leaks at the time, what was shown in the original leaks and what was detailed by the leaker was the infamous scene where Abby, a character that Sony and Naughty Dog swore up and down did not exist, beat Joel to death, and the details surrounding that. There was some other details, like the two big details was that there was a character named Abby that you played for more than half of the game as, and that character beats Joel to death in front of Ellie. And that's kind of what immediately ensued from Sony and Naughty Dog is what really put this game on my radar. And that is because as soon as these leaks hit, Sony went into full damage control and they started issuing DMCAs of all the content, which I guess is fine. But they did something a bit unethical, if not outright illegal. See, they didn't just DMCA the leaked footage or images from the leaked footage. They DMCA'd people that were just talking about the leak. They DMCA'd anything that mentioned The Last of Us 2 or any details from the leak. And they did this regardless of whether it actually had any copyrighted material in it. Now, I've heard some people try to defend this saying, well, the plot is their intellectual property, which some people thought, but you're wrong, because the plot is nothing more than an idea. And ideas are like thoughts. You can't copyright thoughts. So they were going around DMCAing and threatening legal action against people for just discussing the plot. Discussing what was... And another thing that they were doing is they were doubling and tripling down on denying the flat-out existence of a character named Abby. They were denying that she existed at all. They were denying that you played for half of the game as her. I mean, I understand why they would deny that, the leaks were real as far as, like, Joel dying and stuff. And one of the early excuses they gave for it is that, oh, that's just an old build. What they leaked was a very old build, and that's not what's going to ship with the game. And didn't really add up for me. Because what I saw, while a little rough, and you could tell that it was running on a work-in-progress build, there was just way too much detail, way too much polish on it for it to just be something they threw away. So I started just kind of following. I followed the conversation. I followed the fallout from them falsely DMCAing people for just merely mentioning the plot or talking about it. I followed the fans who were defending the game and defending Naughty Dog and defending Druckmann and defending Sony and doing all this while saying don't spoil it. And there was golf memes everywhere in every discussion of this game. There were golf memes in every stream from Naughty Dog, every stream from Sony. Every stream of a streamer who was really hyped for the game and trying to avoid it, their comment sections were just littered with golf memes and spoilers. Because, that's the internet. That's what the internet does. And then about, I want to say 2 or 3 months after that, somewhere in there was a second round of leak that leaked even more of the game, more of the details surrounding Abby and the plot line and everything like that. And it was around this point that me and several other people on the internet started figuring out, hey, this game doesn't look like it's going to be very good. This game looks like it's going to be an atrocious dumpster fire. So that made me want to follow it more, and I kept up with all the news updates. And then a week before the game came out, the review embargo started, where the people that had been given early access to the game for review purposes were able to release a review. But there was a catch. This catch was confirmed by SkillUp in his review. And that catch was that Sony and Naughty Dog made anybody that was reviewing it under this embargo agree to only talk about the first 4 hours of the game. They could not talk about Abby. They could not talk about how the game starts. They could not talk about the plot twists that happen. And they could not talk about literally the last 2/3 of the game. They were given a very specific window. I'm pretty sure, though I can't actually prove this, I'm pretty sure that Sony and Naughty Dog literally gave them the only gameplay footage that they were allowed to use, because I was seeing the same footage on multiple different reviews. I was seeing the same screenshots on multiple reviews. So I'm pretty sure that this embargo was actually so strict that they literally could not even record their own gameplay for their review. IGN obviously came out and they gave it a 10 out of 10. Perfect masterpiece. There's no problems with it. And about a minute into that, they flat out lied, carrying water for Naughty Dog and Sony, in saying that the main character of The Last of Us 2 was Ellie. And they said it in such a way to, add fuel to the fire that, Abby doesn't exist. They briefly mentioned that there's something that happens halfway through the game that, as they said, would make or break whether or not you enjoyed the game. That being Abby, and Abby's entire segment of the game. But yeah, IGN gave it a 10 out of 10. Kotaku, Polygon, SkillUp, and I want to say Forbes all gave it very middling reviews. They didn't actually give it a score, but they were very critical of the direction that the game went in. And the quotes, some of the quotes from these reviews were really fucking bad. Like, the Kotaku reviewer specifically said that this game was horrible to play, unfun. It was just a misery simulator, that they were miserable the whole way through. Other reviewers talked about how many people you fucking kill in it, and how gruesome it is, and how extremely violent it was, which I've been a gamer for a long time. I've seen some very fucking gory games, and it didn't really faze me as I was watching the gameplay and everything like that. I think what kind of set people off is that they went for extreme realism in the deaths and everything, and in the gore. So there's not like huge blood splatters. When people die, they're like begging for their life. You can hear them kind of choking on their own blood and shit. So I guess in a way it is just extremely violent, in the sense that they went for a very realistic, a very dark, thematic way of showing it, which is fine. I mean, if there is one thing I will say is that they have some big fucking balls to actually go through with that, because in a way, I kind of feel like they did something very courageous, because they set out, like, apparently intentionally, to make it a misery simulator. They wanted to make you feel uncomfortable, which, to its credit, is something that's very rare in the game industry, because all these game publishers and game companies are trying to make something that will appeal to the mass market. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think they did it for brave reason. I think that they knew that they could fucking do whatever they wanted in this game, and it was going to sell millions because of fucking name recognition, and like I said, the first game was overhyped to fucking hell. They knew from the onset that no matter what they put in this game, it would sell, and they would make a tremendous amount of cash. So really, they didn't have anything to lose by doing it, but still, credit where credit's due. It is kind of a fucking ballsy thing to put that much realism and visceral gore in your game and to cover the themes that they did. However, and here's where we get into the real meat of the review. By the way, I never quite touched on it. The reason why I'm reviewing it, despite not having purchased it and despite not having played it, is because I have watched the game played through from beginning to end. I have watched segments of it multiple times. And I've put a lot of thought into it. First off, I'd played the first one. I didn't beat it. I played like an hour or so. The gameplay between the first and the second one is mostly the same, in the sense that typically people that enjoyed the gameplay loop and everything of the first game are going to enjoy the gameplay loop of the second game. So there's not a whole lot in the gameplay department that's changed. And let's face it, The Last of Us 1 didn't sell and become as big as what it did because of the gameplay. The gameplay was, like I said, it was mediocre. It's your basic stealth, your basic shooting. Like, the gameplay was just there to push the narrative, because let's face it, the narrative is what sold the game. It was a narrative-driven game. It was a linear game. It was a game that wanted to push you through the narrative, so it was very linear. The gameplay was just serviceable enough to get you from one spot to the other. So in that sense, I do not feel like I have to actually hold a controller and play this to be able to critique it, because I'm not really going to be critiquing the gameplay, and let's face it, nobody interested in this game cares about the gameplay. The gameplay is entirely secondary. It was entirely secondary and an afterthought in the first game, and it is in the second, because as anybody that has followed Neil Druckmann knows, Neil Druckmann does not want to make video games. Neil Druckmann wants to make movies. And there's a very good reason why Neil Druckmann does not make movies, and that is because Neil Druckmann could not make a movie to save his life. If I had to compare The Last of Us 2 to a fucking movie, I would compare it to Uwe Boll's 1968 Tunnel Rats. 1968 Tunnel Rats is one of my least favorite movies, almost of all time. I mean, Dementia 13 is pretty fucking bad, and again, credit where credit's due. The Last of Us Part 2 is not nearly as terrible as Dementia 13. Dementia 13 will make you claw your eyes out and hope that you have dementia so that maybe you'll forget what you just put yourself through. So credit where credit's due, it's no Dementia 13, but it is a 1968 Tunnel Rats, one of Uwe Boll's worst movies. And if you know who Uwe Boll is, and you know the movies that Uwe Boll makes, you're gonna be like, shit, how can you tell which one's the worst one? They're all pretty fucking bad. And you would be correct, they're all really fucking bad. However, I compare it to 1968 Tunnel Rats because 1968 Tunnel Rats is a war movie that subverts all the tropes within it. It is a Vietnam-era war movie. It is all about subverting expectations, which is the only trope that Neil Druckmann seems to know how to do. I guess he read the Wikipedia, or he's like Hideo Kojima. He read the first paragraph of the Wikipedia on subverting expectations. And, thank you, phone. And just fucking went with it. So, that's what 1968 Tunnel Rats is. It's a subversion of the expectation that one would have going into a Vietnam War. It has the soldiers, it has the helicopters, it has the jungle, it has the booming 1960s soundtrack with your Rolling Stones and all that. But it subverts every single trope of a war movie. The scenes are not particularly action-packed. The drama is not particularly dramatic. And in a way, I think it was kind of an anti-war movie to show the futility of war. And the only reason I give it that credit is because every single character, and spoiler for 1968 Tunnel Rats, assuming you would ever want to subject yourself to it, every single person on the screen that shows up on screen in 1968 Tunnel Rats is fucking dead by the end of 1968 Tunnel Rats. They all die horrible, gruesome, vicious, bloody, torturous deaths. It ends with a North Vietnamese female soldier and an American soldier trapped in a dirt Viet Cong tunnel, surrounded by dead bodies as it fills up with water and they slowly drown. It is dire. It is uncomfortable. It is unfulfilling, and it is just terrible to watch. It's a terrible movie. Throughout the movie, not only is the plot structure bad, not only are all the tropes bad, not only is the cinematography bad, but it has terrible written dialogue. None of the characters have dialogue or deliver their dialogue in a believable way. And then it just ends with yet another miserable, meaningless death. That is 1968 Tunnel Rat. And so too is that The Last of Us Part 2. Now we're going to get into heavy spoilers as I dissect the story and narrative of The Last of Us Part 2 to show you what I mean. Number 1. Every piece of marketing to market this game showed Joel and Ellie. They were on the box art, they were on the posters, they were in all of the trailers. This was a Joel and Ellie game from a marketing standpoint. Now I know they didn't want to spoil the surprise. You know, no spoilers. That's how you subvert expectations, right? That's normally a good method. You know, you don't want to spoil the end of your story. You don't want to spoil all the twists and everything. I grant you that. However, you can tell that Neil Druckmann had his head so far up his ass, sucking his pee-pee through his asshole, the piece of flesh between, it's through his scrotum. He just shoved his head up there and sucked his pee-pee until it became an innie and a mangina. Because he really, really thought that he was subverting expectation plot. So confident was he that in the first hour of the game, not of gameplay, mind you, the first hour includes maybe, if you have to repeat a section, 20 minutes worth of gameplay. And since we did not give Metal Gear Solid 4 a pass for being more of a movie than a game, I will not give The Last of Us Part 2 leeway for having so little gameplay with so much cinematic. So an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half. Point is, really, really early into the game. First off, you play as Abby, the character that Sony and Naughty Dog has sworn up and down does not exist. Not in the game. Ellie is the main character. There is no other character that you play as. You play as this character named Abby, who is portrayed as a woman, looks like a man with a woman's head superimposed on it. A lot of the internet seems to think that she is a transgendered individual. I don't know. It's never explicitly stated whether she's male or female. The assumption is that she's female, but just really buff. But she literally looks like I watch MMA, UFC, martial arts, stuff like that. I've seen buff, athletic women. They still look like women. Their body frame, even with all that muscle stacked on it, they still look like women. Abby does not. Abby looks like... Thank you, phone, again. I'm going to have to start silencing this whenever I record. Fuck it, I'll leave it in. Abby looks like you took a WWE kind of middleweight wrestler and superimposed Greta Thunberg's head on the body. It is such a... how would you say it? It is such a distracting thing that it sticks out like a sore thumb. You can't help but notice. But you start off as Joel, then you switch to Ellie. Ellie and Joel's relationship going into the game is terrible. Ellie, which you find out later through flashbacks, it's because Ellie got Joel to finally tell her what happened at the end of the last game. And Ellie and Joel are not really on speaking terms. They don't like each other. Or Ellie doesn't like Joel. Joel is still trying to be the father figure. And there's an early scene where he goes to talk to her in her house and bring her, I think it's when he brings her the guitar. But he's trying to come off as just the doting, concerned father. But instead he comes off as a creepy, sexual tension, kind of like a pedophile, honestly. And I don't know if it was intentional or maybe the voice actor... Neil Druckmann, I believe, directed all the scenes and everything and fucking wrote the scenes. So maybe he just wrote a really fucking awkward dialogue scene between them. He was aiming for and intending for it to be the doting, bumbling father and the angsty teenage daughter type thing. But Joel really didn't come off as a father figure in it. He came off as a creepy older man being awkward due to sexual tension between a much younger female. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just not getting the genius that is Neil Druckmann's writing and directing. But it really came off as kind of creepy. And if I'm saying that, you've got a fucking problem, because I'm not normally one to read into shit like that. This kind of leads me to real talk of thinking that Neil Druckmann might be autistic. Because there's a lot of social interactions in this game throughout the narrative that just come off as wrong. And I don't know if it's because the people portraying the characters are autistic. I don't know if it's because Neil Druckmann is autistic. Or maybe I'm autistic. I don't fucking know. It seems off. But anyway, after you do that, you switch to playing as Ellie. And go through, get you some bigot sandwiches from the local bigot, the town's bigot that's against gay people, because why the fuck not? Which, before we go any further, I have to say, people that were concerned about it being overly woke might want to chill out, because it's not as woke as probably thought it would be. And I'll get to it here in a little bit, there's only one segment that really seemed like a get woke, go broke scene, and it was really cringy. But like the trans character later on in the game is one of the better written characters in the whole narrative. So if you're worried about specifically the SJW stuff, that's not really the problem with this game. It's just a terribly written plot. Terribly structured, terribly written, terribly performed, and terribly directed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So you go and you and Dina, Ellie and Dina, go out on a patrol together because now they're lovers. By the way, Dina conveniently just broke up with her boyfriend, Jesse, like the day before. But he's cool with it. He's a good little Asian cuck. And he's like, nah, I'm already over her. Ellie, you can have her. Go get her. And that seemed weird at first until you realize that it's specifically for plot convenience that we'll get into a little later. But Jesse is just so not bothered by his girlfriend dumping him for a woman. He's not bothered at all. He's already over her. Go get it, Ellie, scissor, do whatever. And the relationship between Ellie and Dina, while sometimes cringeworthy, develops throughout the narrative more or less okay. And as we get closer to the end of the narrative, I'll explain that it actually grew on me over time because it's the only character relationship that gets to develop throughout the entire course of the game. So it actually has room to breathe and to develop and everything. So it's not really an issue. So people that are saying, oh, you're just an incel that doesn't like gay people, the lesbian couple actually works, narratively speaking. Their relationship is developed very well. It moves at a breakneck pace, all things considered, but it's developed pretty well. It's portrayed fairly well. Anyway, after that, you switch over to Abby for the first time, and you play as her, and she ends up getting saved by Joel and Tommy, and then they run from a horde of Shroombies, and end up back at the camp where Abby and her friend are staying in this little ski lodge looking building. And then they introduce themselves. As soon as Joel introduces himself, they all take a kind of hostile stance. And then Abby shoots him in the fucking leg with a shotgun. And they knock Tommy out. And they push Joel up against a wall. And Abby starts beating him with a fucking golf club. And then it switches to Ellie, who at this point is looking for Joel and Tommy because she's been informed by Jesse that they're missing. Ellie and Dina had been smoking pot and having lesbian sex in a basement, so there's that. Anyway, they split up, and Ellie is looking for Joel. She finds this thing. She goes down to the basement where they're at. Sees Joel on the ground with Abby beating him with a fucking golf club. Tries to run to him and gets tackled to the ground by the other people. And held to the ground and kicked. And then Abby kills Joel right in front of her. Ellie's hearing goes out. The scene continues with the hearing out and the ear whistle and everything. It looks like the bad guys are about to kill Ellie, but they're also arguing amongst themselves. And eventually Ellie gets knocked out. And then Jesse and Dina find Ellie and Joel's body. It time skips a day. I don't even know how long into the future where they're back at Jack's. And Ellie is going through Joel's house, and Dina is with her, and then they go to meet with Tommy, I think. Tommy comes to meet her, and she says that she's going after Abby. And Tommy tells her, well, just give me a day to get some things set up, and I'll go with you, and we'll go find her together. And it turns out Tommy goes off ahead of her to Seattle. And then the next day, Abby and Dina leave and head towards Seattle. And then it kind of does an open world thing where you're able to explore and stuff. And this is where the most cringeworthy SJW wokeness comes in. Because they end up needing to power a generator. And the generator is out of gas. So I want you to imagine you're in this post-apocalyptic world. Where the civilization has been basically dead for 25, 30 years, and you need to find gasoline to power a generator. Where do you go? Where do you go to look for gasoline? Aha, but you're wrong. No matter what you just said to find gasoline, you're wrong, because obviously you go to the synagogue. If you want to find gas, you go to the synagogue. And this is such a cringy wokeness put into it that I can't tell whether or not it's a meme, because as you find out when you get into the synagogue, Dina is Jewish. And she has a really, really big nose. And you go with your Jewish lesbian girlfriend to a fucking synagogue to find gas. Again, I can't tell if this is a meme or if this is an SJW woke moment. But it is the most cringy, woke SJW part of the entire fucking game. So you're exploring this synagogue in the post-apocalypse world, looking for gas, with your Jewish girlfriend who, either by happenstance or intended design, has a big fucking nose. And she is talking about how she likes coming from a long line of survivors, to which Ellie replies, oh yeah, you mean the apocalypse? Dina responds, oh yeah, and the Holocaust, and the Crusades. My family always survives. It is so cringingly shoehorned into the narrative. They didn't have to. They could have still had the synagogue and still had that conversation without them going there to look for gas. Because after you find the gas, you end up needing to find a headquarters to set up camp in Seattle while you search for Abby. And you do that in a theater. They could have still had the synagogue and still had that conversation, and it would not be nearly as shoehorned in if they would have set up sanctuary in the fucking synagogue, not the fucking movie theater. It makes no sense, but it's shoehorned in there. And it gets worse because they go in the basement and they find the cabinet. And in the cabinet they find the scroll. And Ellie's like, what is this? And Dina is like, it's the Torah. But it gets worse. You can't shoot the Torah. You can't interact with the Torah. So they wanted to put that in there in the most cringy way possible, but they made damn sure to fix it to where you could not interact with it at all, I guess because that would be going too far. Going to the synagogue to find gas, A-okay. Fucking with the Torah, not on my watch. And it's really fucking, it's weird. It's really fucking weird. It derailed that segment of the plot for me because I had to pause the playthrough I was watching and just kind of reflect on that. The fact that they went to the fucking synagogue so that the Jewish lesbian with the big nose could explain that she comes from a long line of survivors and explain what a Torah is while looking for fucking gas. Is this a meme? Is Neil Druckmann a secret 4chan troll? I doubt it, but I can't fucking tell. The reality is stranger than the fiction. I don't know. That is the most cringy SJW wokeness part of the entire fucking game. Especially since, as the reviews came out, Neil Druckmann, Jason Schreier, and some other dickbag that I don't fucking know got into a tizzy because the dickbag that I don't know compared The Last of Us Part 2 to fucking Schindler's List. He compared The Last of Us 2 to fucking Schindler's List. Again, the truth is stranger than the fiction here. I don't know what to make of that. But then Neil Druckmann said, maybe don't. Or no, Jason Schreier said maybe don't compare it to Schindler's List. And Neil Druckmann's like, but why? Why not compare it to Schindler's List? Because he wants to make movies. He would love to be compared to a movie as eponymous as Schindler. I should have Googled it before, but I only just now thought of it. Is Neil Druckmann Jewish? I never thought about it because I've never thought that it would be a pertinent point of information whether or not a developer or writer was Jewish. I wonder if Neil Druckmann is Jewish. Maybe that might explain it too. I don't know, because there's a lot of self-insert from Neil Druckmann. Anyway, they go to Seattle, they set up camp in a fucking theater, and then they're looking for Tommy while also looking for Abby, and Tommy is also looking for Abby. And Ellie ends up tracking down the dude that tackled her to the ground and knocked her out while, after Joel died, got murdered in front of her, and she ends up killing him and finding a radio. And then Dina sets up a radio room in the theater, and then you find out that the one of the other people that was with Abby is in the hospital. So then you go to the hospital and you end up finding her, and Ellie ends up torturing her to get her to give her information by beating her slowly to death. And then from there you get at some point you meet up with Jesse again, and in the scene that you meet up with Jesse, it's a scene that was in all the trailers, but in the trailers it was Joel that Ellie met up with. They completely changed it. That's how thoroughly they were hiding the fact that Joel died and that there's a second character and everything. There was another point too. If you remember part of the trailer that was revealed, I think at E3 or maybe thereafter, where I think Ellie was the one that was getting hung, or somebody was getting hung up in a tree by the cultists, and then the people were like disemboweled or whatever. Like, that scene is a scene that you play through as Abby. Anyway, this all goes on and on and on. Eventually, Ellie finds out that Abby is possibly at this aquarium, and then she goes to hunt Abby at the aquarium, and she ends up finding two of the other people that were with Abby, a chick named Mel and a guy named Owen. Owen, by the way, you find out later on, is he was one of my favorite characters in the game, because he is the only character that actually talked like a human. He had some really good dialogue, and the motherfucker, all he wanted to do was live in his pillow fort inside the fish zoo and fuck trannies in the ass without loot. Fucking peace out to Owen. Owen was like, Owen and two other characters that I haven't gotten to were the best characters of the game. The game should have been about them, then it would have at least been in. Anyway, Ellie ends up killing them, and right after she kills Mel, when Mel falls to the ground, her shirt kind of comes open, and Ellie realizes that Mel is pregnant. Like, really pregnant. Like, fucking 7 months pregnant. Like, really, really fucking pregnant. And then she goes into a fucking, what I suppose is supposed to be a PTSD meltdown. And then time jumps a little bit further. They're back at the theater. And they're talking. Tommy goes out to the lobby because he's kind of mad at him. And then they hear something. Jesse and Ellie hear something. And they both run out the door. As soon as they open the door, Jesse just gets clipped in the fucking head. Unceremoniously killed. And it's Abby. And she's got Tommy held to the ground at gunpoint. She holds a gun on Ellie. And makes Ellie throw away her gun. And then it starts the second half of the game. That's the entire first half of the game. Then it switches to Ellie's perspective. And it tries to humanize Ellie. And you play through about 10 to 12 hours as Ellie. And it jumps back to right after she got back to Seattle after killing Joel. And then it goes through the 3 days that you just played through as Ellie. But from Abby's, there's all kinds of different shit. I'm going to skip most of it and cut to a part where she runs across, where she almost gets hung by the cultists. And then she gets saved by these two characters named Yara and Lev. They are female. Lev is bald. And Yara gets her arm broke with a fucking hammer in a really brutal fucking scene where the cultists hold her down and just beat the ever-loving shit out of her forearm and elbow with a fucking hammer. And then Lev shoots them with an arrow to save her from being murdered, and then cuts Abby down before she fucking asphyxiates, because she's like hung up on a noose. And then Abby helps them get to a safe spot, and then she leaves them and goes back to the fish zoo with Owen and, oh wait, I have to jump back a little bit. Before that, right after that, she goes and she gets to the aquarium, and she finds Owen, and he's drunk. And then that's when they have their sex scene, which is probably the most brutal thing in the game, because he fucking raw dogs the shit out of her. You can really tell that whoever directed that sex scene is a virgin and has no idea how sex works. Anyway, I digress. I'm trying to speed up a little bit because I've been really deep diving this game and this review is taking a very long time. But as you can tell, I've got a lot to fucking say about it. So, maybe I get this done in an hour. I hope so. Maybe. We'll see. Anyway, Owen fucks Abby in the ass. And then Abby's laying in bed and then she wakes up because she left Yara and Lev with no intentions of going back in this little building, but she knew that there was it was a high traffic area, so she has a nightmare that they're getting hung and decides to go back. Now, somewhere in there, it shows the flashbacks that show that Abby's dad was the doctor that was going to cut Ellie's brain open in the first game and was murdered. And it shows that her and Owen were in a relationship throughout all of that time, but then they eventually broke up. And it shows all the rest of the team and everything, and yada yada yada, boring, not really important. And then Abby goes back, she finds Lev and Yara have been attacked, but Lev held them off. She goes in, she finds Yara she has compartment syndrome on her arm, so her arm is literally rotting while still attached because it wasn't set properly. Abby had tried to set it, but her arm was shattered. So she decides to take her to the aquarium where Owen is so that they can try to help. And as it turns out, when they get there, Mel is there, the pregnant woman that Ellie kills, obviously later on in this. And Mel is a doctor. She's a really good doctor. And she and Owen is the father of her unborn child. And they're a thing. Mel hates Abby. Abby hates Mel. But Mel is a doctor and she likes to do doctoring. So she looks at Yara, determines that it's compartment syndrome, that the arm needs to come off. And then they decide that they need to get medical supplies from the hospital, which is where one of the other people that they work with that's also medically inclined is. So Abby and Lev decide to use a sky bridge that the cultists that from the island where Lev and Yara are from use to travel above everything. Anyway, I'm trying to skim over this because it's not really important. What is important is you get a lot of Lev's backstory and Yara's backstory. They are sisters from the island where there's a bunch of cultists named the Seraphites. The Seraphites are kind of like a religious cult. And Lev is female to male transgender, not like taking hormones or having surgery or anything like that. Just Lev identifies as a boy. Lev is actually named Lily and changes it to Lev. And what it is they have they're a communist island. They assign what your job is in the community and they arrange marriages and shit like that. Lev wanted to be a warrior like Yara, but was instead chosen to be the wife of an elder. So in defiance of that, Lily shaves her head and becomes Lev. And like I said, Lev is a very well written character. I ended up really liking Lev because whether intentional or not, Lev is written in a very realistic transgender way. Because most transgender people are trans for the same reason that most morbidly obese people are morbidly obese, and kind of similar to why most bulimics are bulimic. It has to do with extreme mental trauma. Most transgender people have a childhood trauma, either from abuse, neglect, or sexual exploitation, and that makes them want to not be desirable. They don't want to be found desirable. as kind of like an irrational defense against that because they don't want to be taken advantage. Not all, I should point that out. Not all, but there's a very significant number of transgender people that have a history like this. And so, whether intentional or not, Lev's backstory and everything is very well written and very realistic. Because Lev is transgender to defy the social norms within the community of the Seraphite. It's an act of defiance. It's an act to not be found desirable by one that wishes to sexually exploit them. So I thought that was really good. And even if you don't buy my theory on transgenderism as a whole, Lev is still a very well written character, and so is Yara. They're really, really fucking good. And I enjoyed them. I enjoyed Owen, and I enjoyed Lev and Yara. They were my favorite part of the entire game revolved around them. They were the most well-developed characters in the whole game. Anyway, they get to the hospital. Abby finds the medical equipment. And then she gets captured first. She gets let go by the person that was there. She goes and she gets the medical equipment. She gets it back to Mel. Mel amputates the arm. Then another day passes, and this is the day that Ellie will come and kill Mel and them and everything. And it's discussed between Owen, Abby, and Mel that Owen wants to take the boat from the aquarium and sail to Santa Monica because he's heard that the Fireflies are regrouping there. And Mel doesn't want Abby to go, but Mel is going with Owen. And then Lev and Yara get into a fight because Lev wants to go back to get their mother, but Yara knows that if they go back to the island, they're going to die. So Lev runs away and gets a boat and goes back to the island. So Yara and Abby go to save him. That's where Abby is whenever Ellie kills Mel and Owen. They get to the island to save Lev and the group that they're with, the Wolves, the kind of nomadic military group that Abby and Owen and Mel and Nora and I don't know, fucking Steve. I don't remember all their fucking names. The group that they're with was planning on invading the island and wiping out the Seraphites, and that happens as they get to the island. And then Yara ends up dying. Abby gets Lev. Lev and Abby escape the island and head back to the aquarium. And then they find Mel and Owen dead. And then apparently whenever Ellie was having a breakdown after killing Mel, and then Tommy and Jesse come to get her, they left Ellie's map that apparently showed the theater where they were staying, and Abby uses that to track them to the theater. Her and Lev go to the theater, and then it syncs back up with the Ellie timeline. Then, playing as Abby, first off, in the cutscene before this, she shoots Tommy's eye out, but he's not dead. Then you play as Abby, and you have to fight Ellie, and then Abby damn near kills Ellie. Dina tries to save Ellie, so Abby throws pregnant Dina. By the way, she's pregnant with Jesse's kid. That's why Jesse was around. Jesse was literally a sperm-donor cuck. His job was to to be with Dina long enough to impregnate her and then break up with her so that she could be a lesbian with fucking Ellie. It's such a minuscule plot point, but it is a plot point and it does come up later, so I have to get that out of the way. Anyway, so playing as Abby, you have to beat the shit out of Ellie. Dina tries to save Ellie after Abby damn near beats Ellie to death with her bare hands, which are the size of Ellie. Each arm is the size of Ellie. So Abby takes Dina and slams her face first on the ground and starts beating her head into the floor. And then is going to slit her throat. And Ellie's like, but she's pregnant. And Abby's like, good. And then Lev stops her. So then Abby says, don't ever let me see you again. And then her and Lev leave. And then it time jumps to what has to be a couple of months later. I think it says, but I can't remember. It has to be several months later because they're all healed up. They're living on a house on top of a hill. They have a sheep farm. She's had the baby at this. And it's kind of a happy ending where they're living on this farmhouse on top of the hill. They're together. They have the baby. The baby is healthy. They're farming sheep. They're farming their own food. It's really, like, I thought this should have been the ending. I thought it was going to be the ending. This was not the ending, but it should have been. If you played it or watched it played, where this game should have ended is when Ellie and the baby are sitting on the tractor looking into the sun. It should have faded to black and rolled credits. And then after the credits, it should have shown Abby in Santa Monica getting a hold of supposedly the Fireflies and agreeing to meet up with them. And then that should have been the end of the game. The narrative should have ended like that. That's how this game should have ended, and it might have salvaged a little bit of its reputation. But it doesn't. You need around the house a little bit and fucking farm sheep and stuff like that. And it sits on the tractor, and then it fades, and then it cuts in again, and Ellie is going out to herd the sheep into the barn, and she got the baby with her, and then she collapses on the ground, having a PTSD episode, I think is what people are calling it, having flashbacks to Joel's dead body, and this plus a meeting, Tommy shows up, and he's like, I found out that she might be in Santa Monica through some sources, we need to go get her. And Dina's like, no, don't do this. And she jumps Tommy's ass, tells him never to come back. And then another time lapse passes. And then Ellie packs her bags and she's like, I'm going to go. And Dina's like, if you go, me and the kid are gone. And Ellie's like, okay. And then she leaves, and time skips forward to where you're playing as Abby and Lev. They're in Santa Monica. They go to this place that they've been told the Fireflies operate out of. And she gets on the radio and contacts what is alleged to be the Fireflies and agrees to meet them to join up. They go out and they're fucking attacked and captured by Guy Fieri, post-apocalyptic Guy Fieri, who knocks the fuck out of Lev. And they're captured and taken as slaves. And then it switches to Ellie, and Ellie's trying to track them down, and eventually does, because she almost gets captured by post-apocalyptic Guy Fieri. But she ends up shooting him in the leg and then torturing information out of him. He tells her where he took Abby and Lev, and she kills him. Then she shows up at the place where they're at, and she kills her way to the slave pen, lets the slaves out, and the slaves tell her that Abby tried to escape, and she's out on the beach. So then Ellie goes out to the beach, and Abby is malnourished and crucified to a cross on the beach, and so is Lev. Ellie cuts her down, and then just kind of stands there, and then Abby cuts down Lev and picks him up and says there's boats this way. They walk down to the beach. Abby puts Lev in the boat. Ellie is putting her bag into another boat, and then she has another flashback of Joel's dead corpse, and then she says, I can't let you leave, and she threatens to slit Lev's throat if Abby doesn't fight her, so they fight. In the fight, Abby bites off two of Ellie's fingers, and then Ellie's drowning Abby, and Abby almost drowns, and then Ellie has a flashback of Joel, but he's alive, and then she lets Abby go, doesn't kill her, lets her get in the boat and go off, and then time skips forward again to Ellie minus two fingers, arriving back at the farmhouse, and Dina and the baby are gone, so she sits on the bed and tries to play guitar, but because she's missing a finger, she can't play the guitar. And then that's the end of the fucking game. Sorry to kind of rush the end of it, but it should have ended with, it should have given Ellie the happy ending, the bittersweet ending of living on the sheep farm with her lesbian lover and child. The epilogue that it gave was fucking shitty, and she still doesn't get revenge. Abby and Ellie both live. There's no closure. There's no closure at all in this plot. This plot is terribly written, terribly fucking structured, and it just doesn't work. It pissed off everybody. It pissed off the people that actually liked the first game and the fucking actual fans. It pissed off the SJWs because, oh my god, Lev gets dead named as Lily by the cultists that are fucking murderers. It pissed off everybody because there's no closure. They unceremoniously offed the main character of the first game by making him stupid, by the way, because there's no way Joel and Tommy would have walked into a fucking house with people they didn't fucking know. There's no fucking way. And with Joel's past, there's no way he would be telling complete fucking strangers his actual fucking name. They intentionally made him stupid just to set up Abby killing him. And as if that wasn't enough, they then make you play as Abby. Hang on. They then make you play as Abby for over 12 hours, over half of the fucking game, and they try to make her out as if, oh, she's just a misunderstood, tragic, good character. No! That's not how the narrative works. You set her up to be the villain, the antagonist. Abby became irredeemable at the exact moment she tortured and beat Joel to death. She became irredeemable to the fan base, and she became irredeemable from the narrative perspective. She is now the villain. Now you can humanize her, maybe show flashbacks, but and it shows too, because in all the other reviews, people say they really like the first part of the game, other than Joel dying. They really like the parts where you play as Ellie, but they really fucking hate the part where you play as Abby. It just bloats the game. It goes on for way too fucking long, and nobody likes Abby. Nobody fucking likes her. She beats the fucking first character to death. She's irredeemably bad in the eyes of the fans. So, whenever you hear people say, oh, it's just a white incel, fascist race, whatever, that don't like this game because they're man babies and they don't like diversity, that's not it. It's not it at all. The SJW parts of the game aren't bad. Other than Dina being Jewish, being shoehorned the fuck into the plot, the rest of it is completely bearable. Lev is a great character. Lev is a fantastic character. Fucking well written. Well developed. Ellie and Dina being lesbian lovers it actually improves the plot. Their relationship is great. It develops fine over the course of the game. They should have had the happy lesbian lover on a farm ending. That should have been the closure that the fans got, is that, hey, we didn't get, fucking revenge, but we did get to see Ellie live a life with Dina and the baby on a fucking farm. You didn't have to go the extra mile to make her lose Dina and the baby, to make her lose 2 fucking fingers, to make her still not kill Abby. And that's why this game is fucking bad. It deserves the low reviews. And another thing I will say, kind of at the end of it, is that places like IGN, and I know what's-her-face that used to work at IGN says that reviews aren't paid or whatever. That's bullshit. They're not paid in cash. Like, there's not, like, a back alley transaction where they hand a reviewer a big briefcase full of cash and say, give us a 10 out of 10, and here's your money. It's not coerced in the sense that they say, if you review this game badly, we're going to blacklist you, though they totally fucking will. If you shit on a game of some of these AAA publishers, they will fucking blacklist. Make no mistake about it. We've already went through this with the whole Giant Bomb incident, where what's-his-face was fired for fucking bombing Kane and Lynch. It fucking happens. I don't give a fuck what any ex-IGN fucking reviewer says. I don't give a fuck what they say. It happens. This is what Gamergate was originally the fuck about. It's these fucking social circles going on behind the scenes of video game journalism. The fucking who's who of fucking gaming. I mean, it eventually got co-opted by a bunch of fucking grifters, but initially, the initial anger, the initial spark that threw that into existence was people finding out, proof positive, that these scumbags were being fucking unethical. And every single review that's given this a 10 out of 10, a 5 out of 5, 100 out of 100 is a fucking unethical. They're basically PR for Sony, especially the ones that got to review it a week early. Especially the ones that reviewed it under that fucking embargo. No fucking way is this game a 10 out of 10. In no way of measuring. The gameplay was only slightly improved from the first one. It's glitchy as fuck. The narrative pissed everybody off because it was terribly written schlock. This is not a 10 out of 10 game. It's not a 0 out of 10 game either, though. It did at least function. It did at least function. It did at least have gameplay. It did at least have a fucking narrative with a beginning and an end. Not so much a middle, because where the middle should have been, you have to fucking replay shit as Abby. If I had to rate this game out of 10, I would probably give it a 4.5 out of 10. Because while the narrative was shit, the Owen part, the characters of Owen, Lev, and Yara are pretty good. There was some serviceable parts of the dialogue that I kind of liked. The gameplay is there. It's nothing special, but it's not horrendously fucking bad either. But it's still a glitchy fucking mess. So I'd give it a 4.5 out of 10. And it fucking deserves it. It fucking deserves it. So, with that being said, that's my fucking review and rant of The Last of Us Part 2. I hope it was at least entertaining and maybe informative. But definitely kind of keep your eyes on these fucking review embargoes, because this one was very fucking horrendous from the sound of it. And all of the reviews that came out under that embargo might as well have been coerced to not say too much negative about it, because that embargo was fucking huge. Could only talk about the first 4 hours of that game, but not the direct beginning and not Abby at all. They had so many fucking restrictions on what they could say. So of course it's going to get positive, because that first 4 hours that they were allowed to talk about, by most accounts, other than the Joel death, were the only good parts of the fucking game, because after that it just gets overly long and fucking bleak, and it doesn't feel good to fucking play. And just when you think you're reaching the end of it, it throws 12 hours of fucking shit at you. So no, IGN, it's not a 10 out of 10. Shut the fuck up with that. Anyway, I'm Rikoku Ninja, and I hope you've enjoyed this. I will see you on the next one. Make sure that you like and comment and subscribe and favorite and Snapchat and TikTok or whatever the fuck. You know what to do. See you next time.
It's a sloth.